everybody. I bet you didn't expect to hear from me in the middle of the month, but I've been noticing there's been a lot of action surrounding this Omnibus Music Modernization Act that is before the Senate right now. So I just wanted to jump in here and uh, talk about it a little bit. I want to say from the top of this episode, though, that I know that about half of our listenership is songwriters and the other half is music listeners. This episode is probably going to be face-meltingly boring for the latter half of those people here. It'll probably be face-meltingly boring for the first half as well for songwriters, but at least mundane details get a little bit more gripping when they have to do with your livelihood. So this is fair warning here. If you're a songwriter that's a listener, you probably want to stick around. And if you're a music listener that wants to stick around, that makes you pretty strange, but strange in a good way in my book. So glad to have you with us. Okay, you might remember back in March of this year, I believe it was, we had Brendan Anthony, the head of the Texas Music Office, on the show to discuss this bill that was before the House of Representatives then. Since then, it's passed the House of Representatives, and I think it's also passed the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it's now just before the Senate. And you might remember him saying at the time that the stars have really aligned with this legislation because you had both the performing rights organizations, otherwise known as PROs, and those are ASCAP, BMI, SESAC. Shout out to my boys over at BMI. So they're in favor of that legislation. You also had the Nashville Songwriters Association International and the Songwriters of North America in favor of it. So those are the organizations that are supporting writers. They're for it. But you also had all of the major streaming services, also in this case called digital service providers or DSPs. And that's Spotify, Amazon, Pandora, all those guys. They were for it as well. Now, why are both sides for this? Well, the best explanation I found so far is from the Nashville Songwriters Association International, their website. I'm going to read this statement of theirs because I think it describes it very well. It describes what's in it for both parties here. So, the NSAI Statement. The Music Modernization Act, MMA, came about because the mechanical licensing system is broken. Many companies license songs and they don't compare their data. Therefore, inevitably, bad data gets worse. The initial ownership information is wrong. Splits add up to more than 100%. Clerical errors occur. Titles are not exact. Song catalogs change hands. Songwriters pass away. And that is in the professional end of the music industry. Think about finding info for literally tens of thousands of do-it-yourself songwriters and artists in the digital era who never have publishing deals. It's an impossible task. This is the primary reason digital streaming companies are now willing to offer such significant gains for American songwriters. They want to go to one place and get a blanket license. In the Music Modernization Act, that place will be the Music Licensing Collective. If a streaming company abides by the best practices of the MLC, including paying royalties to songs by their title when the owner is unknown, that money will be held in escrow while a search for the rightful owner happens. Then they can no longer be sued for copyright infringement. In exchange for these improvements and guarantees, they will give songwriters the following. First, a willing buyer, willing seller market rate standard. No longer will streaming mechanical royalty rates be tied to player piano rolls and copyright law from 1909. Next, they will pay all of the costs for the MLC, and for the first time in global history, for streaming mechanicals, songwriters will receive 100 cents on the dollar. Next, songwriters and music publishers will govern and operate the MLC, getting unprecedented control over their own administration, collection, and payment processes. Next, a fair and efficient process for distributing unclaimed funds. Next, no cost representation for songwriters and music publishers. Next, elimination of the devastating government-run mass Notice of Intent program. Next, for the first time in history, all mechanical song ownership information will be contained in one completely transparent database. Finally, major changes in the way ASCAP and BMI rate court judges are chosen, and a fairer set of rules for how those judges determine streaming performance royalty. So that's the first part of their statement, and I think it gives you a pretty good idea of the give and take that's happening in this act here. Now, why has this bill been in the news this week? If both sides are on the same page, what's the problem? Well, in the 11th hour, performing rights organization SESAC has proposed an amendment that will effectively scuttle the bill if adopted. So a quick primer here is that in 2015, SESAC bought the Harry Fox Agency, which was a collector and a distributor of mechanical licensing revenue. Then last year, SESAC was bought by an investment firm named Blackstone. So Blackstone owns the Harry Fox Agency. Okay, now that we have that background, let's hear about what is the Nashville Songwriters Association's characterization of what just happened this week. Let's listen. The Music Modernization Act took many months to negotiate, but just days before a final Senate vote, a proposal by Blackstone, who owns SESAC, Harry Fox Agency, will significantly alter the most important songwriter legislation in decades. They want the government to require that another layer is added to this carefully crafted process. Their amendment would take vendor choices from the MLC and put those back into the hands of each streaming company, who would be required to also hire a, quote, certified administrator, such as the Harry Fox Agency, to administer the licenses, collect, and distribute the royalties. Meanwhile, the MLC will still have to do the more difficult parts of the legislation, including responding to license requests, identifying unknown owners, and administrating unclaimed royalties. This is their statement continued. This is still a quote here. Now, the streaming companies would be back to dealing with multiple administrators and could not go directly through the MLC. Instead of unclaimed funds going directly to the MLC, digital services would have to transfer them from their books through the, quote, certified administrator and then to the collective. This would mean delayed payments and no oversight on this money by the MLC through this stage. Instead of the songwriter-publisher-run MLC providing master reports of royalty distributions to copyright owners, that job would go back to the streaming services, costing the services money and with no oversight, adding to the probability of increasing inaccuracy. SESAC insists their proposal will not add cost to songwriters, but refuses to respond to inquiries of how that is even possible. Plus, every streaming company has said they will not support the Blackstone proposal and will not pay for it. End quote. So that sounds a little hanky. Here is SESAC's response. SESAC is America's second oldest PRO. We have a long history of advocating on behalf of songwriters and providing a premium value for their work unavailable at other PROs in the U.S. since the 1940s. SESAC is a driver of competition that benefits all songwriters. SESAC wholeheartedly supports the goals of the Music Modernization Act and wants those goals made law, just like you do. We are concerned that a lack of competition might damage not only our business, but songwriters too. We've suggested a simple amendment to improve competition so we can continue to ensure that all songwriters and publisher royalties continue to grow. Any assertion to the contrary is simply dishonest. End quote. Okay, so we really kind of got into the weeds there, but let me see if I can give you a bite-sized version of that, of what I think is going on here. Notice, I didn't say what is going on here. I'm telling you just based on everything I've read and heard, this is what I think. And here, based on that understanding, this is a summary of the situation. This is what I would say the situation is in a nutshell. Music creators and music distributors want a central clearinghouse for copyrights that will be transparent and will save money in onerous clerical work. And they do that through the Music Licensing Collective. That would be that central clearinghouse. Distributors like Spotify and Pandora get to save on it administration, and in exchange, they have given copyright holders a better deal on their royalties. A middleman, which currently earns fees doing that clerical and administrative work, which is the Harry Fox Agency, does not want to have to bid on that work through that central clearinghouse, through a proposed government agency, through the Music Licensing Collective. So that middleman is owned by the Blackstone Investment Group, and they are trying to protect their investment by lobbying primarily Republican senators under the auspices that this is a government overreach into the free market. Ted Cruz has called this a, quote, single European-style government-regulated monopoly antithetical to the free market. Okay, we're going to get our resident expert on this on the phone, Brendan Anthony from the Texas Music Office, to help me clear up a few questions that I have and to make sure that my characterization is fair. Mr. Anthony, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Joe. How you doing, buddy?
I'm pretty good, man. How you been?
I've been great, man. Had some great opportunities to beat the heat. I just got back from Newport, which is fantastic.
What a festival, huh?
Man, amazing. How many times have you done that?
I've played it a few times, and then I did the podcast there one year. And then in other years in between, my wife loves going so much that we always pester Jay Sweet for tickets for us to go to. So I've played it a bunch, and I've been to it a bunch. I love it up there.
No, I'll go back. It's awesome.
Was this your first year up there, or had you been there in the past?
Man, I'm embarrassed to say it was my first time up, and we did a showcase Friday night with all Texas acts. It was a blast.
Awesome.
It was really fun. Yeah, really good time.
Well, man, a lot of water has gone under the bridge since we last talked in March here with the Music Modernization Act. So will you catch us up? Last time we talked, it was before the House of Representatives. Can you catch us up as to what's happened since then?
Yeah, so House of Representatives passed this out of committee and then voted it out of the House unanimously, which was a very big first step. And then it landed in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee where it was heard. It received a favorable response from everyone on Senate Judiciary, with the caveat from Senator Cruz that he was going to take a closer look at a couple key points in the bill, and perhaps he mentioned then suggest a couple of changes. So that happened. The Senate Judiciary Committee happened a few weeks ago, and lo and behold, these amendments from SESAC, aka Blackstone, and Senator Cruz himself came through a few days ago, which I think is prompting our conversation today. There's been a bunch of dust up over that, and it's created a pretty robust conversation in the songwriting and PRO and advocacy community after those things happen.
So first of all, did I hear you correctly that a bill in the House of Representatives in the year 2018 passed unanimously?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's insane.
It was a very big deal. It's insane. It's never seen. It did pass unanimously. That's correct.
Wow. And so now it's being held up. Can you give people a little bit of background about the parties involved who have at this 11th hour shown up as opponents? Because up until now, it had really been kind of a love fest. Last time we talked, you literally said something to the effect of the stars have aligned so that all parties involved want to make a deal here. Who are these new parties involved, and what is their agenda?
Yeah, last time we spoke, initially the feeling was that there was between the digital service provider community and the advocacy community a sort of kumbaya moment around this, given the concessions that the bill made towards. I'm not trying to get super boring here, but essentially, digital service providers like Amazon, Apple, Google, Spotify, et cetera, got a clause in the bill that indemnified them against future class action litigation if they remained infringement free. So everyone was pretty much in lockstep with the prior version of Music Modernization Act, which created that music licensing collective.
Right.
And up until a few days ago, it looked like it was going to make its way form. Now, as you say, and I think this is really the reason, and I'd like to touch on that. I think that's really the reason at this hour, some players who've been part of the conversation, honestly, they've been there, they've been in the rooms, have proposed some changes to the bill that make it a little bit tougher for folks to swallow, and have kind of just created a little bit of friction. And those players are, I SESAC because they sort of their advocacy group sort of put the bill forward. They're owned by a private capital firm called Blackstone. Now, if you guys remember, SESAC purchased the Harry Fox rights agency from NMPA, I believe in 2015, and then SESAC was purchased by Blackstone. So Blackstone, in essence, now owns SESAC and the Harry Fox Agency. So that consortium put together their amendment, and that group put together their amendment, and then Senator Cruz put his amendment together, and they essentially say the same thing. They were in the room. SESAC was in the room during all these discussions as one of the four major PROs. And really didn't, I think, now, of course, I wasn't in the room, but what I've been told is they really didn't raise this concern until now, which I think is what's kind of rubbing people in a particular way. They didn't raise the concern until now that they wanted a kind of private sector solution to the MMA to go along with it, and that's what's causing some issues.
And when you say private sector solution, what I understand that to be is instead of administering mechanical royalties through the new music license collective, that would be kicked back to administering those through the digital platforms themselves again, right?
Yeah, that's right, via third-party vendors like Harry Fox. And others. There are others involved.
So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, what I see here is I see basically a middleman, Harry Fox, being pissed that they don't want to have to negotiate with a government entity. They'd rather negotiate with private firms. Is that kind of their sticking point here?
I think it's a sticking point. I think what all of these parties who've introduced these amendments feel is that the current version, the unamended version of the Music Modernization Act, gives exclusivity to the music licensing collective in a way that they don't fully understand.
Okay.
And the people who proposed this amendment, and that's Senator Cruz and SESAC, feel that exclusivity for the music licensing collective, to them, it does not represent great government. And I think that's the reason they put these things forward. And I think the issue that a lot of people are finding is that they did it at a late enough hour that it potentially jeopardizes the whole thing to another side of this conversation. So that's kind of where we are right now. I'm waiting to see like everybody else. And of course, I have to say this, I probably should have said it up front. Texas Music Office wants our small businesses, our songwriters, our workforce, if you will, to be the best informed workforce possible. And that's why I'm so grateful to be able to do podcasts like yours, because we want to get the word out that there are big moves afoot that are going to change laws that have been around for a long time that will potentially benefit songwriters. Mm-hmm. So folks need to be really aware of what these laws, potential laws, are how they might change their bottom line as songwriters, and then to be aware that changes are happening at the last minute that could change things even further. Now, I will say, we don't take a side on these things, but we do feel that it's extremely important that people be as well informed as possible. And to that end, I'll say on the Cruise and SESAC amendments, it's an attempt to keep these third-party vendors, these private vendors, in the conversation, and people can take that, for what it will. Blackstone owns.
Well, that's fair enough.
So.
That's fair enough, and I think there can be a conversation to be had with that. I don't know enough about economics to speak about that one way or the other, but the sticking point seems to me is that most of these digital service providers, Amazon, Spotify, Pandora, this has basically been a non-starter for them. So the overall effect is just going to be that it kills the bill, right?
It could be. Yeah, it absolutely could be. So these digital service providers that you mentioned are tasked with the current version of the MMA to provide funding to run that music licensing collective. Mm-hmm. And I've seen estimates that music licensing collective to operate could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Wow.
A lot to get the music licensing collective off the ground and operational. I don't think anyone knows exactly how much the DSPs are going to be on the hook for, digital service providers will be on the hook for.
Right.
It's one of the kind of gray answers out there that I haven't seen a concrete response to yet. So they're being asked, to foot the bill for this, and because it offers them, a sort of a safe harbor from, litigation for infringement.
And it gives them an easy blanket license going forward because all of the ownership information will be held in one central place, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's why the MMA makes sense to a lot of people, is because there's one centralized collection point. The onus is off the DSPs, those digital service providers, to pair up those works with the artists who need to be paid. And that's why, to songwriters who are not, really up on all of the detailed nuance that goes into the bill and these amendments, the MMA in its current form, after all the negotiations that took it to this point, looks like a pretty good deal for them. And there is a bunch of nuance in these bills. There is a bunch of complexity in these bills. And like I said, that one-stop collection, collective will take a while to get off the ground. And, sure. We don't know exactly what that landscape will look like while it's being put together. How are you going to get paid, Joe, for a song you write during that time? I don't know the answer to that.
Right.
And that's what gives me a little bit of pause about, doing a raw wholesale for the Music Modernization Act. I agree with big, sure. But, I think questions like the ones raised in the amendments should be asked and answered, but it's the timing of it that's so difficult. And it's, it potentially threatens the passage of the entire bill. Like we said earlier, was passed unanimously by the House and stood a very good chance of the Senate until a few days ago. Yeah,
it is suspicious timing. Hey, I want to dig in really quick and just ask you about a few definitions of things that are in this bill and see if you can give me a better idea of what it is. If not, this might be too obscure, but let's just see.
I'll do my best.
I want to understand, what is the quote-unquote willing buyer, willing seller market rate standard, and how is that different from the streaming mechanical royalty standard we have now?
That's a very detailed question. So those streaming mechanical royalty rates, mm-hmm. Those were tied to copyright law from 1909. Okay. So those just absolutely generally need to be brought up to speed, and that will increase rates for songwriters. And so willing buyer, willing seller means that these direct licenses can be struck and better rates can be negotiated. The streaming mechanical royalty rates, like I said, that we deal with today were set way too long ago to be relevant today to our songwriting.
Right.
Because quite frankly, DSPs didn't exist then, and that's why we see. I made $6,000. This is not working. Those streaming mechanical royalty rates tied to 1909 simply do not apply today.
Gotcha. And so when I hear the NSAI come out and say songwriters will receive 100 cents on the dollar for streaming mechanicals for the first time now, what are we receiving right now if it's not 100 cents on the dollar?
I don't know, and I've seen that, and I'm sorry to say I don't know that exact answer, but I've seen them say, now you'll receive 100 cents on the dollar, and honestly, I don't know exactly what that means.
Man, I hope it's a penny, and I hope this thing passes, and I hope I get to buy a second house, bro.
I hope you do too, 100%. I do think it's bizarre, just on the face. You know, when you hear songwriters talk about, you know, hit songs they've written, and the tiny little bit of, you know, remuneration they've received after a great deal of attention and consumption has happened around that product they've built.
Yeah.
You know, why would you look at songwriting as a viable way to support you or your family, other than the argument that we all have that, look, we're songwriters, we just have to do this. It's in our blood, we have to do it. Well, where's the rest of it? You know, where do we get paid back in this business? And this is the section of the business that has not been updated in generations and must be updated. Yeah. And that's why I think there was a great deal of excitement around, you know, the unamended version of music modernization. You know, like I said, these amendments they're just like anything else. They're worthy of discussion and worthy of understanding for certain. But the bottom line is, nominally, these copyright laws have got to be reformed. And this is this current iteration was a really solid chance at taking a whack at that. And I think that's why people are really upset right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks volumes that, you know, our national political culture is so polarized right now, and this is something that passed the U.S. House of Representatives unanimously. So, I mean, that tells you a lot about it, I think, even without knowing the details. And, you know, this last-minute thing that has come in, you can't say this because you're an elected official or an appointed official, but I'll call it what it looks like to me. It looks like a rat fuck to me. But you know, those are my words, not Brendan's there. Well, dude,
you know something I've heard, you know, something I've heard is that, it's really difficult when there's a momentum like we saw in the House of Representatives to stand in the way of that. And why would you, if you had another more concentrated opportunity when the Senate were to take it up?
Right.
And so I have heard that, and I have heard that there's no time like the 11th hour to throw something into chaos and hold it up so you can have this sort of conversation about your point of view via an amendment. And so, yeah, it just looks like, you know, it does look like politics.
Well, of course, but that's how stuff gets done. And, you know, I love politics, man. I've read all those Cairo LBJ books. So I love this stuff. And, well, hey, I really appreciate you taking time at the end of your workday to help our listeners figure this stuff out, brother. It's most appreciated.
Yeah, you bet. And I would counsel folks to really, you know, like I did but last time we talked, you know, really, if this matters to you, and it does if you write songs and you're on Sound Exchange or you have a publishing deal and you get streaming rates, you know, paid to you, it's really important that you take a few minutes and, you know, go check out NSAI's websites where they try to answer these questions about what the amendments mean, and go check out SESAC's position, right? Go look at all the sides happening right now. Don't necessarily buy into all the Twitter rage. Now, you see a lot of artists right now saying, I run away from SESAC or got to have the MMA this way. And maybe they're right. That could be 100% right. But I would counsel anyone, regardless of all those things, to do your research and really understand what these laws are going to do to your small business, before you make, your decision about what you're going to support. Don't be a sheep on this deal. If you're going to be affected by these laws, and if you're a songwriter, you likely will, please go do some research. Contact the office. We'll try to walk you through the best we can too, if we can. And, we're not taking a side here other than, we want an educated group of songwriters to be the best, middle class and upper middle class businesses they can possibly be. And we want to help. So
absolutely,
get in touch with us. Check out those websites. Listen to this podcast. It's fantastic. So
right on, brother. Well, I appreciate it, and hope you and the family are well. And I'll talk to you next time I'm in Austin, dude.
You bet. Thanks so much for the time, Joe.
Yeah, man. Peace. Okay, well, sorry about the audio quality there on the call. Don't do this very much remote anymore, and Skype can sometimes be unreliable, but I think he got his gist across. Some good information there. I will say, after looking at all this stuff myself over the last few months, and then also more closely this week, I personally, after evaluating the information, I personally believe that this bill is a good thing, and I hope that it goes forward. And I will be advocating in the small way that I can for it to pass. And I encourage you to educate yourself on this stuff, figure it out. If there's someone here listening on the SESAC side of the argument that disagrees with me, I'd love to have you on the show. So I'm a pretty easy guy to get a hold of. Get a hold of me. You can figure it out. And we could talk about it. Okay, guys, thanks for listening to this emergency MMA pod, and I'll see you at the end of next month. Peace.